Hi, this is Stephanie Lotvin of Tellybean Knits, and today I'm going to show you how to work the mattress stitch in order to seam together the front and back borders of the yoke of the Bright Axis tee. I am working on the DK weight version of the Bright Axis tee. This pattern is coming out later in 2025, but this tutorial will help you whether you are working on the fingering weight version or the DK weight version. I have already blocked my sweater before working these shoulder seams. You can see that my stitches have already relaxed. I've checked my measurements to make sure that everything is lining up with my target final dimensions, and I highly recommend blocking your sweater before you start seaming. If those stitches have not fully relaxed, it is possible that you could get some puckering or have some trouble with that seam. And especially when working in self-striping yarn, it's important to have all of those stitches fully blocked before you start working that seam. Now, I have also used a special kind of self-striping yarn that was dyed as two matching skeins. So these are mustache yarn perfectly matched DK weight yarn, and these were dyed at the same time so that there would be the same amount of color in each stripe on both the first and the second skein. I was careful to start both the front and the back yoke borders in the same color. You can see that they line up from end to end, and that just took a little bit of planning. Now, if you are working with yarn that was not specifically dyed to match, that's okay. Your stripes might not line up quite as easily. However, it is still entirely possible to line up your stripes, and I'm going to show you some tricks while I'm working that seam so that you can get your stripes to line up as close as you possibly can. And you can cheat quite a lot, which I really love. Thank you, yarn, for being so flexible. So to work on this tutorial, what you are going to need is you are going to need a tapestry needle, and you are going to need a seam yarn, and you need to go ahead and have those shoulders already blocked and ready to go. So I have marked on my sweater where I am planning to seam with a removable marker. Now, I did this by trying my sweater on. You can actually change the amount of the seam in order to open up the neckline of this sweater or close it up more. And so I tried my sweater on and found that this would be the best point on both the front and the back to join so that I have the right amount of sweater closed at the seam and open at the neckline. So you can go ahead and try to do that too before you get started. If you don't do this, just make sure your measurements are careful and as accurate as you can possibly be before getting started. So you will need a seam yarn. I used the same color as the body for my seam yarn. So you can see here, when you look at the sweater, I have not yet woven in the end of that seam yarn. That if I pull my seam here, so you can see it's laying right here, my seam is running right along here. You cannot see the color of my seam yarn from either the inside or the outside of my sweater. So if I gently pull on that, you still can't see the seam yarn. When the mattress stitch is done properly, this seam yarn is going to disappear. In a regular sweater that's not worked in self-striping yarn, I usually recommend using a seam yarn that's the same color as the two sides of fabric that you are planning to seam. However, with self-striping yarn, that's just not possible. We're having so many color changes that you don't need to worry about that. And if this seam is done properly, you'll never see the seam yarn. So I'm going to flip it into the inside so that you can see the selvage there. You also can't see the seam yarn on the inside of your work. If you go looking for it, you can see it along the edge, the inside edge of that selvage, but from the outside, it is invisible. So pick a yarn that you're most comfortable with and pick a yarn that's the same weight as the yarn that you used to work your garment. So I'm working in DK weight yarn, and I've seamed with my DK weight yarn. Using the body yarn was simple because I had it on hand. When you choose your yarn, you need to make sure that you cut it to a length that will allow you enough yarn to have an end to weave in later, but also not make you feel like you're struggling or that you're playing yarn chicken or that you need to use another scrap of yarn later. So what I recommend, and this is another important reason for blocking in advance, is you need a length of yarn that is 3 times the length that you are planning to seam. So you can see here, this is the length I'm planning to seam. So I've chosen a body yarn, and I'm going 1, 2, 3. If it's a little extra, that is totally fine. Just try not to go under that by much. Now that you have your yarn and your tapestry needle ready, it's time to start seaming the Mattress Stitch seam. To get started, place your yarn on your tapestry needle. Now I like to pull up the yarn so there's 4 to 6 inches at one end, and then the rest of the yarn is hanging off. This is actually going to be the end that I'm really working with. And I've lined up the 2 edges that I'm planning to seam together. Now, I haven't woven in any ends yet on my sweater, so there are lots of little ends. I like to weave those into the selvage once everything is finished whenever possible, and so I've left those just sort of out, and I've been carefully scooting those yarn ends out of the way so that they don't interfere with the seaming that I'm planning to do now. You can see I've laid these out, and that because the 2 edges were worked in stockinette, they do curl under, and we are going to be working right along the edge on both sides, so we're just going to be gently uncurling that as we work. But I have lined the 2 seams up next to each other, and I've tried to get my stripes as close as possible just to see what things are going to look like. And now I'm ready to start seaming. So I'm going to begin by inserting my tapestry needle from the back to the front on the first side of my work. I'm going to begin on my right side, and I'm looking for the very corner of my work. I'm just going to insert into, if I pull that open, insert into the hole closest to the corner of my work. So I've actually got 2 legs of my yarn in front of my tapestry needle, and I've come into the lowest hole at that bottom edge of my work. And I'm just going to pull my yarn through until I have about a 6-inch tail. So I don't want to pull it all the way through. There's nothing that's going to keep it from coming through. So I just need to make sure that later I have the ability to pull a 6-inch tail. And this gives me also a little bit of adjustment space as I'm seaming up these first few stitches. If I make this really short, it's possible I'm going to accidentally pull that through as I start to tighten my seam. And I want to make sure I have enough of an end to weave in later. So I'm just going to make sure that's about 6 inches. Now I'm going to come across to the other side of my work. And I want to show you something before we get started. If you roll the edge of your work open, you'll see little V's along the edge. Now they might be kind of messy because since there was no border along this stockinette, they like to get pulled in smaller, larger. They definitely like to curl. Now I'm going to come to the second side of my work, and I'm keeping my yarn really loose now. And I'm going to come all the way down to this corner. And what I'm looking for is I want to insert my needle from the front to the back, and I'm going to pick up the bar that is connecting those V's to the rest of the fabric. And what I want to do is I want to come from the front of my work, pick up that bar, and come back to the front of my work. So I've got 1 bar on my needle, and I'm going to pull my yarn through that bar. Now here's where you really need to be careful, because when you start pulling these stitches together, that's when you can accidentally pull your whole thread out. So just be careful and keep that loose. Don't worry about bringing it all the way together just yet. Now I'm going to come back to the first side where I originally inserted my yarn. And finding the bar on this side is going to be much easier. So I want to insert my yarn into the same place that my yarn is coming out from before, when I originally set my yarn into my fabric. So I'm going to insert into the same hole. This time I'm going from front to back, and I'm going underneath the bar that is hidden right there so that I can pick that bar up, that same bar. Now, if you're working the fingering weight version, pick up 1 bar and then pick up 2 bars and put 2 bars on your needles. For the DK weight version, I'm just picking up 1 bar. And now I'm going to bring my yarn through. And again, I'm leaving a little bit of a gap there. And now I'm coming back again to my second side, and I'm inserting where my yarn came out once again on that second side. So it's much easier once you're established to find where you need to go. I'm inserting into the same hole where my yarn is coming out of my fabric from front to back. For the DK weight version, I'll pick up 1 bar. For the fingering weight version, I'll pick up 2 bars. So for this version, I'm picking up 1 bar and I'm just bringing my yarn through. And you can see I have my yarn is coming back and forth between my fabrics. And if you'd like to do some adjusting to bring that in a little closer, you can. I can pull a little on my tail and I can pull a little on my working yarn. I like to have a few of these strands between my needles before I start bringing the seam together. So I'm just going to work a few more before I start adjusting. I'm going to come back to my first side. I'm going to insert my yarn into the same hole where my yarn is coming out of that hole into that exact same hole. For the DK weight version, I'll pick up 1 bar. For the fingering weight version, I'll pick up 2 bars. I'm just going to pick up 1 bar for the DK weight version, and I'll pull my yarn through. I'll come back to the first side. I'll insert my needle into the same hole that my seam yarn is coming out of from front to back, and then I'm going to come back to the front and pick up that single bar. All right, now that I've worked a few strands here, I'm going to start adjusting and closing up that seam, but I don't want to pull anything really tight. So I'm going to adjust a little from both ends. So I'm going to adjust from the bottom and pull that seam together. Start pulling that seam together. Now you don't want to pull this too tight. If you pull it really tight, it's going to make your fabric pucker. It is possible, if it's too loose, to adjust that tension pretty easily using the end of your tapestry needle. You can come down and you can pull on those stitches in the middle and adjust them if they're really loose. It's a little trickier if it's really tight. So it's better to go a little looser especially as you're getting established, and to work that seam together by pulling on your seam yarn a little at a time. So when you've worked a 1/2 inch of seam, maybe then start adjusting, work another 1/2 inch of seam, then start adjusting. And that way you can make sure that you're keeping the tension that you want on your seam. Now, if you notice, you can see at the bottom of my work, you can still see where that seam yarn is showing at the very bottom edge. Don't worry a lot about that. It's going to come apart a little bit as you work, and you can always give that a gentle tug. And then when you weave this end in, that is going to fix it in place so that your seam will not gap at the bottom or the top of your seam. It's really now what you want to think about, the tension that you're thinking about is in the middle of the seam. All right, I'm going to continue to work my seam back and forth, and when I come to a color change that does not match up perfectly, I'll show you what I do. Now that I've worked a couple of inches, I just want to show you what the seam is looking like. It's looking really neat, and you can see I still have my seam yarn going here. One thing that is really useful to do once you have established your seam is to give that just a gentle tug and make sure that you are not noticing any obvious puckering or any real looseness in your seam yarn. I'm feeling confident in that seaming. I feel good about that, and so I am prepared to start moving forward, but it's nice to just give it a little work and see how that's going. Okay, I'm going to pause right here and show you something that is going to come in really handy for you and will probably come up more than once for me. You can see, now this one is really close, you can see that my stripes are not lining up exactly here. There are actually slightly more rows in this orange here. I think one more row in this orange here than there is on this side for my left panel than on this right panel. And so I'm going to work a sneaky, very simple little trick in order to make it more likely that those will line up. I find that the earlier I start working this trick, the easier it is to keep the rest of my stripes lining up as well. And it can be worked really as frequently as you need. So because I see that this side is slightly longer than this side, so I have more of the dark orange on this side than I have on this side. I've already seamed my dark orange. I'm just going to skip a bar. So by skipping a bar when I seam on the side that is longer, it is going to cinch the stripes closer to a match. So if I skip the final bar on that dark orange, it's going to cinch the light orange down slightly so that those two will line up. So I have here, I'm about to work into the side that has one more row of this darker orange. And when I would typically insert my yarn into the bar where my yarn is coming out of, I would go ahead and insert it into that last bar, that same place where my yarn was coming out of. I would insert it again into that same spot. But in order to cheat the stripes and make the stripes line up, I'm going to skip that bar. So if you are working with fingering weight yarn, you can skip 2, possibly even 3 bars to make this work. Be careful if you're skipping 3 bars, but you can skip 1, 2, or possibly 3 bars with fingering weight. With DK weight, you can skip 1 and even 2 bars when necessary. So I'm actually going to skip this bar. So instead of inserting my needle here, I'm actually going to go past that bar and go to the bar above it. And by going to the bar above it, it's going to help cinch those 2 colors closer together. So I'm just going to pull this a little tighter so you can see what I mean as I work. I'm going to come back across, and I'm not skipping any bars on the other side. Let me get a little past this. You can see right now that the edge of the orange on this side is not exactly lining up with the edge on this side. So when I come back across, I do want to go into the same place, insert my yarn into the same place that I was coming out of before. So I'm not skipping any bars on the side that is slightly shorter. I'm just skipping on the side that was slightly longer. And now when I pull that together, it's going to help cinch that in place. It raises that bar just a little bit and brings the longer side down. And then I'm just going to go right back to what I was doing before without skipping any bars. So anytime that comes up with it where the 2 sides are not lining up properly, I just recommend skipping a bar or 2. You can experiment, and the farther you get past that line, the better it's going to line up. So you can see now that I've been seaming a little past that becomes almost invisible. It's really hard to tell which side had more rows than the other side. And I'll just continue to seam as before. If you're working the fingering weight version, you'd be picking up 2 bars. If you're working the DK weight version, you're just picking up 1 bar. And you're not skipping any bars unless those stripes are just simply not lining up. Now I'm going to pause right here again and show you, it looks like I've already inserted my yarn in this side, but it looks like my 2 oranges are not lining up quite right from the left side to the right side. So I'm actually going to come back. I'm going to take this one out, and it looks like this side is a little longer. The right side is a little longer than the left side, and so I'm going to use that trick once again to help line those stripes up. So when I come into the longer side, I'm going to skip my first bar, and I'm going to insert into the bar above that instead, and then bring that through. And then when I come back to the first side, I won't skip the shorter side. I won't skip any bars. I'll just go ahead and insert just as I normally would. If you need to do this on practically every stripe, you can. It's okay to be picky to get the results that you want. Okay, I've come to the end of my seam and I am just about to finish, and I just wanted to show you one last step. So I've come back across my work and you can see it's a little loose now. I can pull that tight, but it won't stay tight until I weave in my ends. The last thing you need to do is actually insert your needle back into whichever side you want to finish on. So depending on how you landed when you were seaming, you may finish on the right hand side, you may finish on the left hand side, and either side is fine, but you have one final step. You need to insert your tapestry needle from front to back into the same hole on the opposite side you came out of. So you can see when I am currently on my right hand side, so I need to go back to the left hand panel, and I'm going to insert my yarn from front to back, and I'm not going to pick up a bar this time. Instead, I'm going to insert into that same hole from front to back and then pull my tapestry needle through to the wrong side of my work. And now I'm just going to gently close that seam up. And like I said, it's going to pull and that seam will come apart. You'll probably see at the beginning of your work the same thing. There's going to be a little pulling where it comes apart and you can see your seam yarn. Until you weave that yarn in, that seam yarn is going to show. Now, one of the great things about seaming with the mattress stitch is it's created a natural selvage for you on the wrong side of your work, and you can use that selvage to weave in your yarn. And since there's not going to be any stitches picked up around the neckline here, I can go ahead and weave in that yarn on the wrong side of my work. If you decide not to weave it in right away, like I've done on the first side, I have not yet woven in that yarn because I really wanted to try this sweater on with both shoulders seamed before I wove in any yarn. You'll see that that stays loose, and you'll probably just need to make some gentle adjustments before you weave in your yarn. Be careful with your sweater when it is in this state, when there are shoulder seam yarns that are loose like this, not because they'll gently come apart, but because if they get pulled on, if you pull really hard on the seam yarn, you can actually pucker that seam towards the ends on either end. And then you'll have to go back and make some adjustments to your mattress stitch. So just be gentle with your sweater when the ends are not yet woven in. And so at this point, I'm planning to try my sweater on and then I will weave in those ends. So now let me just show you what the mattress stitch looks like on my shoulder. So you can see I've completed the mattress stitch and I'm really happy with how the stripes are lining up. Is it exactly perfect? No, but I'm not perfect and this is hand knit. It's pretty close to perfect. It's perfection in my eyes. And if you find that once you finish your mattress stitch that the stripes aren't lining up perfectly, if you find it to be too hard to deal with, you can always take a little bit back out and then rework those stripes. Sometimes it's hard to see exactly where they aren't lining up until you've completed the seam. But if you're feeling like, oh, there are some minor adjustments that could be made, but I don't want to take my mattress stitch back out, something you should also keep in mind is that blocking, your final blocking, is going to make a big difference. When you're blocking, if you find that there are stripes that are not exactly perfect, you can come in while it's wet and just gently move those stripes along the mattress edge into a better position, and it'll actually do quite a lot because, well, blocking is magic. And blocking is always magic, and no matter what project you're working on. So this is my final result for my shoulder. I'm extremely happy with it. I'm going to try my sweater on, and then I'm going to add some ribbing to the sleeves, and soon I will be wearing it. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching.